It's now time for our last speaker of the day, and it's my absolute privilege and really proud to welcome John McDonnell, Member of Parliament for Hayes and Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer to DPAC conference today. So over to John.
Is this mic working?
That's for the camera.
Oh, is it? Okay. Thanks a lot for inviting me. I think you made me a member of DPAC a few years ago when I had my heart attack. So I'm here as of right, I think. And I apologise I couldn't get here earlier. I've been down to Cardiff this morning to the Co-op Party conference. Interesting enough, in the Co-op Party, the discussions today was around the organisation of care around cooperative principles. And again, I just said to a few of them that it would be worth DPAC working with them to talk about what that means in practice and what lessons they could be learned, as long as it's driven by what you would describe, I suppose, in some areas as the consumer or whatever, as long as it's driven by disabled people themselves to design the care packages. It is the disabled people themselves who can come together in a cooperative way, working with carers as well. So, is this working? Sorry. I'll have to repeat all that, Dee Dee, will I? What I said is I was at the Co-op Party, and they're talking about the cooperative organisation of care, and it partly is to challenge what's happening in terms of the privatisation of care, and also because of the cutbacks that are happening in local government, as a result of which is actually undermining the private companies within the care sector. Anyway, that's my excuse for not being here this morning. Can I just talk through now the next few months about what's happening in terms of the Labour Party working with DPAC. The leadership campaign ends on the 21st, and we'll have the results of the leadership election on the 24th. We're hoping, and I'm extremely superstitious about predicting results of elections, because I failed to win my seat originally by 54 votes and 4 recounts, all of whom I now know who didn't vote for me. We've now got a majority of 16,000, so I persuaded them and their families. Anyway, if the result goes the right way and Jeremy is re-elected leader of the party, we're hoping he'll be re-elected with a strong mandate. Now, part of the process we're going through at the moment is Jeremy's been publishing statements of policy in a whole range of areas, so that if and when he is re-elected leader, those policies then he can draw upon on the basis of that mandate. Now, in the next week or so, Jeremy will be repeating many of the statements that he made in the last leadership election around disability, and will be taken from DPAC a number of the proposals he put forward in terms of both in terms of protection of existing services, defending them, but then also the development of benefit and services and legal rights, basically. So watch this space, but you'll see a lot of what Jeremy will be saying in this last week or so will be a reflection of the DPAC policies that you've been pursuing. What will then happen, if and once he's re-elected, what will then happen, the new shadow cabinet will be put in place, I hope reflecting many of the people that are there at the moment who have been absolutely brilliant. But what we want to do is demonstrate in these coming months a capacity to go into government at the drop of a hat. So if Theresa May calls election tomorrow or May or whenever it comes, we want to be in a situation where we've demonstrated we're ready for government. So we want to be seen to be an alternative government in waiting. What does that mean? That means we put in place the structures of government. So yes, the staff that we want to take in, the advisors, etc. But also we have on the shelf, ready-made, the policies to implement from day one. The way in which we're doing that is making sure we go to those people and organisations to help us who are at the forefront of the campaigns that we've been campaigning with over the years. And one of those, obviously, is DPAC. We want to ensure that when we go into government, all those policies that we've been campaigning for and advocating for are on the shelf, ready for implementation from day one. Now, some of these issues that we're campaigning upon need action already, so that's what we're doing. We're urging Labour local authorities, for example, to ring fence and protect the ILF funds. We're trying to prevent the cutbacks that are going ahead. We're trying to work with them and campaign with them against government cutbacks. We're doing all that we can in Parliament, as we did with regard to PIP and tax credits, etc., to defeat the Tories whenever we can, working with our members in the House of Lords as well. So all that defensive work will continue on. But I think some of the most important work now is the development of policies ready-made so we hit the deck running. Now, we need to think through in these coming months exactly how we do that in relation to DPAC. Disability labour, exactly as someone has said in the workshops, disability labour, to be frank, has been under-resourced within the labour movement. There hasn't been satisfactory support given to it. And I pay credit to those in disability labour who've worked hard to get the organisation up and running and make it as effective as it is. But it needs proper resourcing. So again, if Jeremy gets re-elected, we'll make sure the resources go into disability labour, because then that will be the vehicle within our own party in which we can then go outwards and talk to others. But DPAC will have a fundamental role in advising us on the policies that need to be developed. And let's just run through some of those areas of policy. First of all, is to make sure that we have a legislative base so that we have in law very specific rights so that people with disabilities, disabled people, have a right to basically an income that will upon which they can have a decent quality of life, a right to the appropriate accommodation, a right to access to work when they feel it's appropriate, but in addition to that, a right to basically a right not to be discriminated against. And we've seen in this recent period, we've gone backwards rather than forwards. The levels of hate crime against disabled people has been a disgrace, to be frank, over the recent years. So we want to ensure that in legislation now, in law, we have all those rights established very clearly. But rights established are meaningless unless you can actually enforce them. And that does mean ensuring we restore things like the cuts in legal aid, we prevent the charges that have been introduced now for access to employment tribunals when you're discriminated against at work. All of those rights need to be properly resourced so that people can exercise those rights. I have to say also the access to legal advice through law centres, etc., is something that we want to look at as well, because at one point in time in our campaigning, we were planning law centres in virtually every community so people could have access to that legal rights, legal advice and legal redress. That's the first thing. The second thing then, yes, is to make sure that people have the right levels of income. The debate around basic income, actually it's come from the left initially, not the right. And there's people like Guy Standing that we've been working with to see whether or not this is something worth examining. But it isn't worth examining if people want to try and use it to have, here's a basic income that you then go out there and buy services or whatever. The basic income is meant to be for everybody. That gives them an income in which they can have a decent quality of life. On top of that, where there are special needs that people have, they should be properly funded and properly serviced. Now, it would only work in that way, but we're at the first stages of that discussion, and we're waiting the outcome of a number of pilot experiments that are going on across Europe. Again, any benefit system or any form of basic income will only work, to be frank, if it's designed by the people who use it. So that's why I welcome the workshop that you've had today, and I'll take back the critique that you've done. But we won't move forward on this without your involvement in how we design the system. And to be frank, any system of basic income, if we were going along that path, would take a number of years to roll out and actually a number of years to convince people whether it's appropriate or not. That's why some of the pressures that will be on us when we first go into government will be about how we defend the existing system and improve on it, and then replace a number of those forms of income that were cut under the Tories. And again, you'll be advising us on what priorities there are when we go back into government. The one thing we have to say very, very clearly, though, for those people who say that this country can't afford a decent living for people with disabilities or disabled people, we've got to challenge that as well. Because the way that we will afford it is basically ensuring that we have a fair and just taxation system. So that means tackling tax evasion and tax avoidance. We've launched a report 2 days ago on a reform of HMRC, the tax collectors organisation. The tax gap between what should be paid and what isn't paid. The Treasury, the Tory Treasury is saying 34 billion. Others are putting that at 120 billion. HMRC staff, for every pound spent on a member of staff, you gain £75 worth of income. What the Tories have done, they've cut 40,000 jobs from HMRC, and it looks as though they've got another 10 or 15,000 to go as well. What we said this week is that we'll reform HMRC, we'll ensure it's properly staffed and properly resourced to enable it to collect the taxes that we need, and on that basis you won't just eliminate the deficit, you'll be able to pay for the services and the benefits, etc., that are being cut under the Tories. Now again, we're being opposed or we're being challenged by that, some elements both within the Tories and elsewhere, because what they don't want is they don't want a government coming into power that will redistribute wealth and will redistribute power within our society. But that's what a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour government will do. It's a fundamental premise. The next area, so you establish legal rights, you establish the way in which people can gain an income, either through the improvements in the existing benefit system or a basic income system, so people can have a decent quality of life. But on top of that, you've got to ensure that people with disabilities and disabled people are represented at every level of decision making. So the structures that we'll put into place in opposition will be the structures that will go into opposition, into government as well. And that'll mean bringing organisations like DPAC and others into government to advise us on the development of policy. So you will be at the heart of government, sitting alongside ministers and others, advising them on how to implement these policies. That's critical because in addition to, you can imagine what's going to happen when we go into government. At this point in time, we've gotten all the media against us just during a leadership campaign. Can you imagine what they're going to be like when we start implementing this stuff? So therefore, that's why we need to build our social movement, not just to get a Jeremy Corbyn re-elected, not just to get a Labour government elected, but also to ensure when that Labour government is elected, it's supported against the attacks that will inevitably come. Where from? From the establishment that will do all it can to retain its wealth, its resources, and its power to prevent the redistribution of that wealth and that power right the way across society. And that's why the building of DPAC was so important to us a number of years ago. I came to the founding conference and I just thought at that point in time there was something here that could be developed that could be fundamentally important, not just to the left, not just to the Labour Party or the trade union movement, but to our society as a whole. And to be frank, that's what you've proved. That's exactly what you've proved. Up until then, representations of disabled people has largely been through organisations that went along to government with a begging bowl approach. I don't blame them or anything like that. That was the nature of the politics at that point in time. But what we needed was an organisation that said, we're not coming here to beg, we're not coming here as supplicants, we're coming here as citizens to demand our rights. And that's what DPAC was all about. I made a statement at that founding conference which got me into a bit of trouble as usual, but it was basically, I said then and throughout that period, that if you make the representations through the formal system of going to see your MP or your local council and all the rest, and you're not being represented, there's no other route but to go direct action. And that's exactly what the policy was undertaken by DPAC, that we will research, we'll get the policies and ideas together, we'll seek to lobby and persuade, but when it comes down to it as well, if people are not listening, we have to use other forms of direct action. And that, I think, to be frank, despite some of the criticisms within parts of the movement or in the media, that's been incredibly successful. How has it been successful? By basically raising the level of awareness of what's going on through direct action stunts, etc. The storming of Parliament was brought about because Parliament wasn't listening. It was simple as that. Closing off Westminster Bridge to gain that publicity, when again, because no one's listening, I think was quite fundamentally important. And in that way, I think what you've done is you've created a climate of opinion around this particular issue, where people realise that disabled people aren't going to take it anymore. They're actually going to be in your face and make those demands. And you've pushed the whole debate on. I don't think in Parliament we would have won around PIP or tax credits or whatever if it wasn't for some of the direct action campaigns that took place. So I just congratulate DPAC and all that you've done. Finally, let me make this point. You've gone onto an international plane today. You've brought together speakers from different countries. We can raise all our campaigns together, and I think we've got to build upon that. So one of the things that we need to do when we go back into government as well is to ensure that in government we have those international structures where we bring people together. Now, we've done it in the past through the European social forums, etc., which have brought different groups within civil society together to talk about their needs and to plan joint campaigning. We should ensure that's properly resourced by Labour in government, and we should make sure that we build those structures right the way across Europe and the globe. We're doing some of this at the moment. You've done it today. We're working with socialist and social democratic parties right the way across Europe that Jeremy has been working with. And I think there's a real willingness now to work on that international and global plane. So I give that commitment that when we go into government, we'll work with you to establish the wider disability movement right the way across Europe and across the globe and resource it effectively. I think the conference today has obviously been extremely successful, but you just look back on the recent years of how far we've come as a result of DPAC's work, the influence that you've exerted, the publicity that you've gained, and you've raised the issue up on people's agenda. And I think on a number of instances now you've forced a position where there can be no turning back. That doesn't mean to say it won't be tough in the coming period. There'll be another round of austerity measures coming from the Tories that we've got to resist. We know where that will be targeted. They thought that they could focus the cuts on austerity measures on those people who they thought couldn't fight back, and people, in particular disabled people. They now know, as a result of what you've done, disabled people aren't taking it anymore. They are going to fight back, and they will support the election of a government that will actually be, whose policies will be designed by disabled people, implemented by disabled people, on behalf of disabled people, and at the end of the day protected by disabled people. And it all comes about as a result of one thing you've displayed right the way throughout. You've displayed it this week in all the different struggles that you've linked up with, whether it's the doctors, RMT and all the rest of it. And it's one thing I'm eternally grateful for you. It's the show of solidarity that you've displayed. Solidarity.